Well, welcome everyone to the Orange Branch Historical Society. For those here for the first time, a part of our mission is to transform the abandoned Orange Branch into a series of parks. We also have a publication at essexreview.com for those interested in local arts and preservation. When I was thinking of guests to invite here, the people behind the Essex-Hudson Greenway were at the top of the list. Not only is their story inspiring, but it is also historically associated with the Orange Branch. I'm going to show you uh, my screen right now. So on July 15th, there was a groundbreaking in Newark, and this was the location of the old Forest Hill station. Here, the tracks would diverge, and one of them went to the Oranges. We have three guests today who will explain how it all happened and where they go from here. We have Deborah Kagan and Tiffany Robinson from the New Jersey Bike and Walk Coalition, and we have Julia Wong from the NJDEP. We're going to have a discussion with Deborah and Julia, and then Tiffany is going to lead us in a talk about the North Jersey Trail Network Initiative. So in 2002, uh, the section of the old Booten line, which is the image on my screen, became abandoned when the Montclair connection was created. Where and when did the idea for the Greenway first begin?
It started so the commercial traffic on the railways stopped around 2002, and there was some freight that went for a few more years. So as it became clear that there wasn't going to be an active rail line, the local towns, particularly Bloomfield and Montclair, people started to talk about what could this be? What could this space be? And started to imagine that it could be a park, a trail, and Bloomfield, um, the Bloomfield Open Space Trust Fund got involved and started promoting the idea of having a greenway. And there was a group of advocates based in Montclair and led by David Wright that formed the Friends of the Ice and Iron. So it was originally called the Ice and Iron. Um, and that was based on the history of the railroad transporting ice and iron along the line, right? So those were the early days, and that sort of visioning and talking to people in the particularly in Montclair and Bloomfield and Glen Ridge went on for a number of years. And then they started to look to get support from the surrounding towns. So between like 2006 and 2012, there was an effort to get resolutions signed by local township councils and the two counties, Essex and Hudson. And that started really bubbling up this whole idea that this might be possible. But the railroad, which was Norfolk Southern, still owned the right of way. And at that time, they weren't that interested in selling. So there became like a point at which the advocacy sort of got held up at that point. So in 2014, the New Jersey Bike and Walk Coalition took this on as a major campaign and began to do a petition, began to talk to more elected officials, reached out to Senator Cory Booker, who was not senator at that time, um, and Brendan Gill, who was Essex County Commissioner, became very active and championed a lot of this work. That went on for a number of years, and we were still hearing back from the railroad that they weren't interested in selling. And then there were some organizations that were regional that became involved. So the East Coast Greenway became involved, and the person who was heading that up at the time went on to start the 9/11 National Memorial Trail. So there were regional organizations that started to talk about this could be a connector for longer range trails. And that also gave it a boost. And the people that were working on the East Coast Greenway at the time had been involved in the Allegheny Gap Trail, which is a very long trail um, that had been owned by Norfolk Southern, the right of way. And they helped to initiate conversations with the railroad. Along the same time, there started to be meetings with some possible funders to help move this effort forward. And there also was a routing study done that was paid for and done by NV5, an engineering planning firm. So all these things sort of started to happen around 2017, come to a head. And after a number of meetings, the railroad came forward and said they were interested in talking about selling the right of way. At that time, the New Jersey Bike and Walk Coalition brought on the Open Space Institute. The Open Space Institute is a conservancy organization. They work all up and down the East Coast, and they have an expertise in transaction for railroad corridors. So they came on board to talk to the railroad about creating a purchase and sale agreement, which they got the railroad to sign in 2020. So they started around 2018, halfway through the year, about a year and a half, negotiations back and forth, and they came to an agreement in 2020 to have a purchase and sale agreement. That purchase and sale agreement had a price on it, and it also had a time deadline on it. And that deadline originally was 2021 in the summer, and we actually got that extended to the summer of 22 so that we could do this advocacy. So starting with the purchase and sale agreement coincided actually when I became executive director of the New Jersey Bike and Walk Coalition, and we started a major campaign with Open Space Institute and the 9/11 National Memorial Trail as partners with some funding from Open Space Institute to do some due diligence and to do a advocacy campaign to get a government entity to buy the right of way. And that we went around with some different ideas and possibilities of who would buy. At one point, we were talking about having both counties co-own it together and manage it, and that was one idea. Um, but it became clearer that the most likely and the best owner of this property would be the state.
Hmm. I noticed there was that Essex County Commissioner Brendan Gill was writing uh, 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 columns for some local newspapers. So he was obviously a key ally. He was also a board member of the New Jersey Bike and Walk Coalition at the time. Were there any other key allies that helped push this along?
Yeah, there were lots. There was tremendous support locally from mayors in Montclair, in Glen Ridge, in Bloomfield, in Newark. In the period from 220 on, the mayors of Jersey City and Newark, Mayor Fulop and Mayor Baraka were very supportive at the time. The Hudson and Essex County the commissions put in resolutions of support. Um, at the time, Congresswoman Cheryl was very supportive of the Greenway, as was Senator Booker. So there was a lot of elected officials, both at the state level and at the local level. And then there was just a ton of advocacy organizations. So between that time period that I just mentioned from 2020 to when it was signed, there were 157 organizations that signed on in support, and there were 8,000 letters sent to the governor in support of the state buying the right of way to create a greenway, a park. So we did a year and a half of very, very intensive outreach. It was during COVID, so it was outreach not in person, which was a challenge. Um, but we reached out, I did literally 50 presentations, I think in a year and a half, so that people could ask questions and learn about it. And we went to local organizations, we went to regional organizations, we presented to town councils and just did a ton of outreach and advocacy to get people's support. And that boosted up the legislators and the councils to be able to feel stronger to advocate for the sale.
As you mentioned, Norfolk Southern initially refused to sell the right of way. I'm curious who approached them and what made you persevere in spite of that first initial refusal?
Well, I first to answer the last part, you can only do this work if you're willing to persevere. It takes tremendous patience and perseverance. These projects take a very, very long, they're very complicated. They take a really long time to advocate for. In 2018, one of the key organizations that helped connect us with the railroad was the 9/11 National Memorial Trail.
Mm,
As I said, they had been in negotiation with Norfolk Southern, so they had the contacts.
mm.
Um, Michael Pheasant, who was from Norfolk Southern, had been involved in it. They had John Foley, who was recently retired from Norfolk Southern. Um, so they had these relationships that they had established through their own transactions that helped to get people to the table to have that conversation. And once everybody was at the table and the possibility of actual funding and buying it, um, those conversations then evolved to an actual offer for sales and purchase.
Do you have any advice for rail trail groups on approaching the owner of a right of way? And as a sort of secondary question, uh, is it important to have all the funding lined up before you approach them, or is it okay to just have an initial discussion?
Well, it's always great if you have the funding, right? If you have the funding, that's a huge argument in your favor, both for the railroad and for all the other stakeholders. That's often not the case, right? Often you're not going to get the funding till they know you've got the right of way. That often happens. So in the case of the Greenway, um, we did not know where the funding exactly was going to come from when the sale and purchase agreement was signed. So the answer is no, you don't absolutely have to have the funding, but because we had a deadline, we had to make sure very quickly that that was a realistic possibility, right? And the truth is that the state didn't commit till the very, very last moment. So we weren't sure whether or not the sale and purchase agreement would have sunsetted. And if it did, then the property would be open to private development, and we would have lost what would have been a generational opportunity to create this state park. So the answer is no, you don't have to, but if you can, that's great. Or, if you have um already know who the owner is and they're not that interested, they don't have to buy it from them like you do with railroads. Cost a lot of money to buy right of way. A lot of times a government entity, a county or a municipality will own it, and it's much more willing to do a conversion to an asset that will be of great benefit to their community.
So around 2021, there was a real fear that the plan might not happen. And I'm curious if you ever lost hope and where you turned in those moments.
um I wouldn't say we lost hope. I'd say we were frustrated and concerned that we might lose this opportunity. And that fueled this like very intensive advocacy. It sort of ups your level of advocacy, right? So we went from more informational and general support advocacy to a pointed advocacy at the governor, at the state, that they had the opportunity to have this incredible transformational project or lose it. And it was up to them. Um, And that takes a lot of combination of pressure from grassroots advocates and residents in the area that reach out not only directly to the governor, but to their local elected officials, who then in turn also reach out to their county and then reach out to the state. So, and in the midst of this, you have champions, and Commissioner Gill was absolutely a key champion to do all of this. And having somebody like that who knows, uh, how things work behind the scenes with electeds is really helpful. And he also had strong connections to Governor Murphy's office, the front office, since he had been headed up Murphy's campaign. So he had a relationship with the governor's office that was really helpful. Those relationships combined with the pressure from the advocates is sort of the helps build what I would call the perfect storm in order to get that decision made by the state. So we had lots of narrative, lots of dream. We had this vision. People were so excited about this. This project, I will tell you, is has had the most enthusiasm of anything I've ever done widespread like this. People love the concept of this and could see it and envision themselves on the Greenway. And that helped tremendously to bring about the decision making at the decision makers level, which is in this case was at the state.
So the Essex-Hudson Greenway is now the newest state park. When did the DEP get involved and why? And I'm curious, who was there? What was it like? Can you talk about that initial conversation?
Yeah, and then I'm going to turn it over to Julia since she is from DEP. But the pre part of this is negotiating with the state. So once Governor Murphy agreed to have the state buy the right of way, which was announced in November of 21. Then it is up to the state to decide who is going to manage and run and what this is going to be. And he, at the time, declared that this was going to be a state park. And because that decision was made at the state level, it then became the responsibility of the Department of Environmental Protection, which has state parks within its jurisdiction as a state agency. And then I'm going to turn it over to Julia.
Thanks, Deb.
Hi,
Um,
Julia.
Hello, for those of you who might have logged on a bit late. My name is Julia Wong. I'm with the Department of Environmental Protection, proudly sitting out of State's Park office these days. Actually, right now in our trailer, not so much a trailer, our construction office site in Newark for developing the park. But yeah, those conversations early days were quite frankly exhausting. And I'm sure Deb can attest to it. There was such this pressure that had been built from the purchase and sale agreement, Murphy's announcement, and then all of a sudden it's, pedal to the floor. We need to get this done before the clock chimes out. And can we get it done? Do we have the funding? Who's going to be managing it? What are the logistics? How do we get this through all of the red tape that is state government in order to make this happen? Because as Deb mentioned, it would have been such a missed opportunity, such a generational loss if we weren't able to make it happen. But after all of those conversations and more than a handful of sleepless nights, we finalized acquisition on, what was it, August 19th, 2022. So just in the nick of time before that purchase and sale agreement ran out. And from there, we've been basically nonstop in terms of design, engagement, and now construction of the first phase, which has been crazy and fulfilling and wonderful.
Congrats on that.
Thank you.
So Peyton, for those who don't haven't seen the vision plan, I sent out a link through our email list, but I can send that out again when I send the recording to our subscribers. But on page 98 of the vision plan, it mentions community programming along the Greenway. Who will organize that, and how can people get involved in that?
Yeah, absolutely. Please check out the vision and action plan. It is beautiful and filled with honestly more knowledge and background on the project than most people will care to read. But it is well thought out and most, if not all of your questions should be able to be found in there, at least for the answers that we have these days. In terms of programming, though, it's going to be like any other state park. So if you've been to Liberty State Park and you've seen 5Ks, you've seen yoga, you've seen concerts, movies, that sort of thing, that is in part a combination of working in that instance, Liberty State Park, in collaboration with Jersey City. It's also third-party organizations who want to host an event and put that on. And in some instances, it's DEP ourselves putting something on. We have just begun conversations with the city of Newark to figure out how we can tap into the existing Newark Park, like City of Newark Park programming, see if there's any sort of synergy or extension of events that they do in their parks that we can pull into the Greenway, make it more of a I don't know, in-place experience. We're also looking into things if there are things that DEP should be hosting, or again, those third parties coming into us. All of those being the slightly larger events. Then on the small scale, obviously there's the family reunions and picnics and birthday parties and those sort of things. So it's still a work in progress, but I would say the best parallel is think of Liberty State Park and how all of that programming is conducted. And it'll be fairly similar for Newark.
So near Forest Hill Station, which is where the groundbreaking was, there is actually another abandoned corridor. For those who don't know, that's actually part of the old Orange Branch. And I was curious if there was ever a discussion to incorporate the lower corridor into the Greenway. Was
Oh
that ever
man.
discussed, Julia?
Certainly discussed. I would have loved to do it. It was not part of the initial conversation for Norfolk Southern's sale to DEP, or I guess the state, not DEP specific, at the time. And it has now since transferred hands from NS over to New Jersey Transit. I believe they purchased it at the beginning of 2025, if memory serves, roughly, maybe a year ago. And right now, I don't believe that they have any plans on reactivating the line or transferring it over to DEP for parks. But I have monthly calls with transit trying to figure out how things interplay, what we're doing. And it does come up on potential future planning. So as of this time, no, not incorporated into the park, but also not necessarily anything concrete in terms of transit or otherwise.
You mentioned how beautiful the vision plan is, and I think this image is very representative of that. This, of course, is the Newark segment where
Mhm.
the groundbreaking took place. And and trust me, I'm happy to see this developed. I think it's such a photogenic part, and it also links together to Branchbrook Park. But I'm curious because the advocacy began in Montclair. I'm curious why the Newark segment was the first place to begin construction.
Yeah, absolutely. So the groundbreaking was actually ever so slightly farther east than Tiffany Manor, but with Tiffany Manor building
Hmm.
in the background. So in case someone was trying to situate themselves. But Newark ended up being the logical lot the segment that we went forward with for a lot of different reasons. We were constrained in part by funding, right? With funding comes specific timing restrictions or environmental things and hoops that you need to jump through in order to, make sure you're compliant with everything. And looking at the entire stretch of the 9 miles, if you break it into segments, which we consider as anything from one point to another, like a bridge would be a segment, like bridge on one western side, bridge on the other, or a road and a road, road and a bridge, that sort of thing. And there are, 50 or so different segments along the way. How many of those can we link together? Of those, if we link them together, what would have the most beneficial environmental impact if we were to start working on them now versus in 5 years in terms of stormwater changes? Newark has a combined sewer system. So what can we do to potentially infiltrate or decrease stormwater runoff in a very urbanized, developed area? After environmental impacts, what are the social, cultural impacts that we can be having? Who needs the most access to green space? Who potentially would benefit from environmental remediation of the soil or a change in air quality, that sort of thing? And we created, this is also partially outlined in the vision and action plan. part through the phase development portion. It's a prior report as well, how all of these things rank together. And Newark ended up bubbling up to the top as to again parrot Deb's words from earlier, the perfect storm of environmental impact, cultural impact, social health benefits, all of that, with the combination of what can we do with the amount of funding we have. And we landed here.
I'll also just add to that you asked me earlier about champions, early champions for the
Yes.
Greenway. And Senator Ruiz from Newark, who grew up in this neighborhood, was a avid advocate for the Greenway, had been working for many years to try to get the railroad to clean up what had become a really sort of a garbage dump, basically, in the middle of Newark. And she also has been very active around light rail and transportation and trying to get, active corridors through Newark. And so here was this perfect also reason to do the Greenway there. It had become a real blight in Newark,
Mm-hmm.
and it could have this incredible transformation to this beautiful park. She is the Senate Majority Leader in the state Senate, so also had a loud voice for it and was very active in also trying to meet the needs of Newark's communities.
Yeah, you talk about that feedback cycle of individuals going to their local politicians who bubble up and how it can all sort of circle back together. She is such a good example of how she listens to her constituents. And if these people are coming to her directly with these concerns, what can she do about it, both as, a loud voice in the Senate, but then also just as a person in the community. That's a great example. Thank you, Deb.
As we look forward to future segments, which will include, as I understand, repairs to a lot of the infrastructure, including
Mhm.
bridges, do any of the segments present architectural or logistical challenges?
All of them. Every single segment has its own challenge, which is not to say that they can't be overcome, but everything has a complication. Bridges, as you mentioned, are by far and away one of the biggest ones, in terms of the amount of funding in order to rebuild something, but then also from the design and engineering portion. So if you look over towards the Hackensack River and you need to figure out how we're going to deal with the DB drawbridge, right? That needs to either be tall enough to accommodate boats to go through it, or it needs to lift to let boats go through it if you can't build it tall enough. How do you build that? What does that look like on either side? If you just build it really tall, is that a really long lamp? How long does that ramp need to be? What do you do with the space underneath that ramp? Is that more program? Like there's so many considerations that start spiraling at that point. And then if you ignoring the very big bridges, go to the really small ones, okay, well, that's local traffic that we now need to impact if we're going to be closing something for construction. Are any of these bridges historic? How are we rebuilding them? Are they good enough now and they just need to be rehabbed? What kind of future use do we want for these bridges? Is it just bike ped or do we need to consider some form of a bus? It starts to spiral. But we are thinking about it and we are working through it. And it is nothing that our designers, engineers, many smart people working on the problem can't solve, but many challenge.
What is the timeline for the entire project?
Oh, the entire project? Oh, the cop out answer is it's funding dependent, which sounds awful. Um, we are actively trying to figure out phase two and gather all of our funding streams, figure out what that could look like. My personal want, so this is not a DEP state park at large comment, but I would love to see a big chunk built next, right? 1 mile in Newark is fantastic, but maybe we can tack on more miles to that, right? Something contiguous, something that people can really get the experience of going down the path, whether it's bike, running, walking, as I do. I'm not a runner. But I would love to see at least the determination of what could be the next phase by the end of this year. That's would be delightful. And then shortly thereafter, starting working on the design, the engagement again, getting the people in those communities to really share their voice and their wants for the path, and then go from there.
As the plan currently stands, the Greenway will end in Jersey City
Mhm.
at Van Kuren Avenue, but there have been talks to connect it to the Bergen Arches. However, New Jersey Transit just announced a plan for a transitway that would
Mhm.
use the Bergen Arches. Does this plan complicate the plan to connect the Greenway to the Bergen Arches?
Not necessarily, right? So DEP owns to the end of our alignment, Van Kuren, at which point there is a current gap between where our trail ends and where New Jersey Transit's Bergen Arch Transitway picks up. Their plan, which is lovely, if you haven't actually seen it, I think they're going out for further design notice to proceed sometime this month or next. But it includes both their transit adjacent to a bike ped path. So if we, the royal we, can figure out how to connect those two, then there would be a contiguous bike ped path all along our park into Bergen Arches, just owned by different state entities. But at the end of the day, does the ownership matter if you get to walk from Montclair to Jersey City the whole way? Probably not.
What advice would
Also,
you give to groups advocating for rail trails?
Deb, did you have something to pitch in?
I was just going to say, Jersey City also has put together a connectivity Greenway
Hmm.
plan, and the vision for that plan includes not only connecting the Greenway to the Bergen Arches, but to follow through from the Bergen Arches through to the Sixth Street embankment, which would take it to the Hudson River, and that's part of a vision that they've had for a while to connect those two. So I think. Not only are we talking from Montclair, Jersey City, but Montclair all the way to the Hudson.
Manhattan, yeah. I have this dream as an aside where I like start on the High Line in New York and then I go to New York Penn Station, take the train over to Secaucus, walk from the Secaucus train station to the Greenway and then the Greenway down. And you can just do this big loop one day, take the ferry back to the city or vice versa.
So, broadly speaking, what advice would you give groups advocating for rail trails?
Oh, Deb, that's you.
Well, I'm going to reiterate something I said earlier, which is there's two, I think, really important things that have to keep in mind. And one is patience and one is perseverance. And the two together is what will get you through what is a very long and bumpy process. Um, every corridor is different. Every greenway is different and has different challenges. But there's some things which I think we can say consistently you need. You need support from your local communities where this corridor is. You need broad, diverse support. You need to intentionally go to people who may not always come out and give their voice for a construction, an infrastructure project, right? There's lots of people that feel that their voices aren't being heard or that have not had the history of being involved in these kind of projects. It is critical that you reach out to them. And that reaching out doesn't mean just putting out a flyer. You have to do the hard work. You have to go talk to people where they're at. You have to go to their organizations, go to their farmers markets, go to, to their neighborhoods, go to the local town councils meetings and reach people who haven't been involved before because they want to be involved. And you have to develop the pathways to hear those voices and to get them involved. Once you start building that momentum, the local and you can do that at the same time while you are reaching out to elected officials. So we did community-based organization at the same time that I reached out and offered to have meetings with every town council along this corridor and asked the county councils to do a presentation. So you can be doing both of those things. And what happens is you build this grassroots momentum and interest, and you have to have a vision and a narrative for why, right? What will this project bring to these communities? Why is it so important? What are the health benefits? What are the economic benefits? What are the transportation benefits? What communities will this benefit, right? And that story, and each story is specific to your space, helps your elected officials to be able to advocate for it at a different level. And that includes looking for funding, right? You've got to have a strong argument if you want to go get funding either from the state, from private foundation, or from the federal government, which at the moment is particularly difficult, right? So I think it's combining those things and understanding where your strength is really with with your community, with the residents, and helping them to help the elected officials make an argument for this.
Yeah.
And that relationship is really critical. Being patient, looking for champions, finding those champions and letting them do their thing, helping them to have opportunities, press, op-eds, photo, community cleanups, all kinds of activities where you engage people and they start to understand what this project could mean. So there, I'll stop at that. It's a lot of work.
It is. My only thing to add to that, and you alluded to this, is having a clear ask,
Yes.
right? It can't just be, we want to do something, or it would be a shame if. It needs to be like, this is the opportunity, here's the vision, and here's what we would like you to do about it. And maybe you don't need to have all of the answers at the outset, right? But like, you need to start thinking about what makes sense and what you actually want, because no one can help you if you aren't asking for a help, right? Or maybe help is the wrong phrase. No one can join you on the journey to making what you want if you don't know what you want.
One of the strong suits of the vision plan that impressed me, at least, is that there seems to be a real desire for these parks to belong to the communities where they are located. So thank you for that. Now we are going to open up the presentation to Tiffany Robinson, who's going to tell us about the North Jersey Trail Network Initiative. Welcome, Tiffany.
Good afternoon, folks. Yeah, that was actually really cool for me to hear this, to kind of know. And I love that we've actually named this Rail Tales because it is very much storytelling. What is the history behind all of this that you see? Some folks like me that have just kind of come back to the state after a while, kind of hearing all the background of what's been going on, has been actually quite cool. And so, yeah, I'm going to tell you about the North Jersey Trail Network Initiative because it is actually, it fits in really well to this. And I'm Tiffany. I am the Trails and Active Mobility Director at the New Jersey Bike and Walk Coalition. So, part of this initiative, we're doing this with the Rails to Trails Conservancy. And this is an initiative that is taking links like the Greenway, and saying, hey, how many of these do we actually have across the region? Where if we were actually able to make these linkages, Julia talked about the opportunity to, add more mileage, and where can we make better connections, and where we do make connections, how that then opens up the economic benefits, stormwater benefits, social benefits. So how many different linkages are there within our region that we can actually bring together to make effective change? And so what we started realizing, New Jersey has 564 municipalities, each one doing their own planning. So you're planning trails on a municipal level, you're planning them on a regional level, you're planning them on a county level. So this initiative goes across 6 counties. So it's Bergen, Essex-Hudson, Union, Morris, and Passaic. And what we're doing is coming and saying, hey, listen, there are so many different trails that are being planned here and there. Wouldn't it be great if we actually took a look at it together? look at the region holistically and seeing where we can actually make linkages and then where we can also fill in the gaps. Where are there places where folks do not have the opportunity to be able to make any type of connection actively? Right? We know that within the region, there are a number of communities that do not have vehicles in their household, right? So we plan as a state for cars and things like that, but there are a lot of people that don't have access to a vehicle. Economically, there are folks that do not, even if they had access to a vehicle, monetarily, financially cannot maintain a vehicle. So what are the options that we're putting out there for folks to be able to travel within the region without those things and actively? So the Greenway is a really great example of being able to have a safe, separated network for people to be able to walk and bike and make connections where they want to go, not only within their community, but also to connect to other communities and to connect to places outside of the region or within the region, like being able to get to Jersey City and maybe connecting forward to a close Manhattan. Or going the other way, if you're interested in going to places that are in Morristown, we know that New Jersey 250, there's lots of great historical places to be within the region, within the state. So how are we allowing folks to be able to do that? And if I can share my screen, Darren, I want to be able to do that just so I can show folks when we're talking the region, what we're talking about here, and just some of the things that we've been trying to work on and uncover in terms of what this looks like. When we first started, really being able to take a look at, what is it that we have here? So, this is our initial kind of map that we started to work with and saying, hey, what exactly do we have here? Um,
Tiffany,
and
did you share your screen? I want to make sure we can see it.
oh, can you not see it? I did.
Let me see.
Can you folks see it? Oh, you can see it. Okay, good.
Building the network, yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So you'll see that what we're seeing is, gosh, there's so many different things happening around the region. There are, you've got East Coast Greenway, you've got the Greenway, you've got the Morris Canal Greenway. How can we actually look at this holistically? So that's what we're doing. We're trying to, right now, we're in the stages of that information gathering, seeing what it is that we have out there, what physically exists, and then putting that together to say, okay, here's what we know. Where is it that we actually want to go? What do we want this network to look like? How can we fill in the gaps? And then what is the vision for this? So we actually just came up with our vision statement to be able to communicate what it is. Yes, we know what we have here, but what is it that we want to see? We want to envision a place where folks can be able to walk, bike safely, be connected, where there are off-street connections that need to be made, that we are able to make them, where there are on-street connections that we need to make, that they're safe. So the North Jersey Trail Network Initiative is really about bringing together all of these things, having those conversations with people in the community, with the folks that are responsible for these trails, to say, how can we actually, create infrastructure, set aside funding for this type of infrastructure to be able to be done. And I think the last thing I want to say is around programming, because while we're doing all of these things, it's also about the folks that don't have, so yes, the Greenway has a very dedicated route, but there are folks that are kind of adjacent to it. So also trying to be able to use that as momentum to say, hey, yeah, the Greenway goes here, this link goes here, but don't we all want to be able to access that same opportunity and maybe get folks in those other communities excited and want to create their own Greenway linkages? So it is about, yes, the places where these things are happening, but also just getting folks excited and interested and motivated to create those opportunities within their own communities. So I like to call that priming So we're priming folks to be able to get active no matter where they are. And then that is the kind of, if you build it, they will come. But also, we need folks before the building to come and be active and be advocates for wanting it in their community. So, yeah, that's me. I'll stop
Thank you,
sharing
Tiffany.
now.
And,
Yeah.
since we were founded, many different groups have been coming to us and telling us about their ideas, but there doesn't seem to be a centralized sort of organization, and that could be a real opportunity for the North Jersey Trail Network to be a place where, where everyone can be aware of what everyone else is doing too.
Absolutely. And we're actually, so we're doing a few things. We just launched this initiative officially last February. So we've been doing that information gathering. We had a few community meetings, just kind of highlighting the initiative for people. This is an initiative where we are doing the reverse work. We're not putting lines on a map to say, this is where we want to go. We're asking folks,
Hmm.
hey, this is what we know, but where is it that you'd like to go? And we're building that with people. Our vision statement is not our own. That's things that we built with folks that came in to put their hands up to be a part of this initiative, to say, to work with them to come up with that vision statement. The mapping, we have a mapping working group that is nothing that we came to say, this is where we want to go. What do you think? It's been everything that folks have. And there's folks on the Garen is part of our mapping working group, and the information that folks have in their own community that they're able to bring to us is so valuable. But we're working on our public facing, so we are going to be having a website. So on that website, folks will be able to kind of tap in to see what's going on with us, but also if they're interested in learning more about what's happening, I would like for it to be a central place of what's happening with trails in our region. So you should be able to look to our website for that. So that is going to be coming in April. I would say mid to late April. So be on the lookout for that.
Sure. Do you have a domain name that you're thinking of
I
using?
I do. Now I know you would ask me this, and I don't want to get it wrong. So you let me find it, and then I'll get back to you.
Thank you, Tiffany. I appreciate it. And
Yep,
also,
yep.
if people want to reach out to you in the meantime, what's the best
Yeah.
way to reach you?
I'll put my email in the chat. It's simple. It's tiffany.robinson@njbwc.org. All right.
Well, thank you, Tiffany. I see one question from the audience. Casey wants to know, as a member of a trail coalition trying to put together an economic impact study to pair with our cost study, I'm curious, where did this team turn in order to gather data on the economic community benefits of rail trails on a general or global level?
I guess this one's for me. I was reading Julia's response in chat. Yeah, so DEP has studies that they have done, and that's one great source. I'm very curious what Trail Coalition, Casey, you're doing. You're in.
Hi, yes, and everybody can hear me okay?
Yeah.
Hi,
Great.
Casey. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you guys for presenting everything you've done so clearly. I really have appreciated listening to you talk throughout this time. I'm in the Hudson Valley and specifically involved with the Ashokan Rail Trail expansion right now. And there's some local things going on politically and with, some of the ownership of the land and everything that not necessarily trying to get into, but just trying to gather resources and ultimately kind of put together our own vision plan like you guys have. So like my question set, I was kind of looking for, you've illustrated how critical those local level and really the bottom up approach is. But I just want your input on kind of the top down, how it is we can advocate for rail trails and what the data says generally so that we can campaign with some of that.
Yeah. There and this is a great approach, by the way. I applaud your approach of trying to understand the economic impact and build that narrative. Some resources nationally and generally, regionally. So the Rails to Trails Conservancy, who is our partner on the North Jersey Trail Network, does have information on their website. They've done a lot of trail work across the nation, including impact studies. For the Hudson Valley in particular, I know that the Open Space Institute has been active in doing some networking work there. They funded our due diligence and advocacy work pre-sale to DEP. That was very helpful, but I know that they're working on impact studies as well for the trail work that they're doing in that particular area. So that would be another resource. And then there are major trails across the country, including ones like the Atlantic Beltway, the Delaware Valley Heritage Trail, that have done economic impact studies. The state of Massachusetts has done a good one for its Central Valley. And here in New Jersey, the Lawrence Hopewell Trail, which is in Central Jersey, also did a really good impact study. And that one might be somewhat similar to Hudson Valley, in that it's not a major city, but has a lot of tourism, as Hudson Valley would have for an impact study. So there are some existing resources out there, and you can start there. And then if you can get any kind of funding, there are agencies that will do the impact study for you. And we've been looking into this too. You can do projected impact studies based on similar kind of numbers. So there's a lot of numbers that are out there nationally for how much you get for your dollar. You know, you put in 1 mile, how much for whatever it is, and how much do you get back? And there are some models nationally to try to figure that out. And then it also includes things like, so there's impact of increase in tourism, impact of increase in new business, impact for you know, what the health benefits are. So you can go in a lot of different directions with impact studies.
Great. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
And we have one more question from Chris Vasquez. What are some of the challenges and trade-offs in regional and local community planning when it comes to converting abandoned rail lines into trails? Are there any rail trails that ever evolve back to rail lines, especially in dense communities?
Okay, I'll start since there seems to be a bit of a dull here, and someone else can pick this up. Yeah, there's something called rail banking, right, which protects a rail line. It protects the owners, like the railroad, the ability to take back their right of way to build back rail line. I don't know, and the Greenway was a rail abandonment project. I don't know of any existing abandoned rail lines that have been converted back. But the option to do that is what's called rail banking. It is something that railroads want, because it does give them that option if they want to use it. But I don't know, Julie, if you know of any. I don't know of any that have actually been activated.
Neither do I.
Yeah.
It was a concern or contemplation of ours, that if we invest X number of $1 million into development, what are the odds that, you know, it's just going to need to become a rail again? Or what does that look like? All of our lawyers very heartily, adamantly concluded that it is not a particular concern for us. I don't think we came up with any examples. But in terms of the earlier part of it,
yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, in terms of the earlier part of your question on the trade-offs in terms of parks versus rail, I am a planner. It is always a tension, right? On what is the mode of transportation, what does a community want, need, what benefits not just a local community versus a larger system. And I think in many ways there is never one correct answer. So it's talking to people and figuring out what not just the short-term vision, but the long-term vision of an area is, and what do you want to invest in? in that there is not one right answer. It's which of the benefits would you prefer in a given situation. So no clean answer. Sorry about that, Chris.
Well, I want to thank everyone for attending, and I want to thank the panelists for taking time out of their day. Rail Trails is a series, so if you're interested in what's in store, feel free to sign up for our newsletter. I want to shout out two events coming up. One of them is the community cleanup at Glen Ridge. Julia had mentioned that it might be booked up, but I think it's important to note that these things are happening. Am I correct, Julia?
Yeah, you're right. So we only had a limited number of spots for people who we can actually do the cleaning up, because we need a certain ratio of staff on a not yet developed park. But we, in conjunction with the actual cleanup, there is some visioning. So if you want to swing by, we'll have a couple tents with some information. If you have immediate thoughts or want to talk to someone, have more questions, come by. I will be there as well this Saturday. And I think we're looking good for rain.
If you follow our newsletter, which I will put in the chat, you can find out more information about where Celebrate Trails Day events are happening. There may be one on the Greenway, still to be determined. But also, National Trails Day is a thing, and it does happen in June, and it will be on June 6th of this year. So if folks are interested in doing something on a trail or one of their local trails, yeah, please again reach out. You have my email to be able to talk about that. So yeah.
Thank you, everyone, and enjoy your day.
Thank you, folks.
Take care.
Have a good one. Bye.
Take care.
Thanks everybody for coming.
Bye, Julia. Bye, Deborah. Bye, Tiffany.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Deb.